So this is In Retrospect with Hatz. First time we're doing it in person with the new setup, so hopefully things go okay. But Hatz, obviously you are someone that I think a lot of people would know if they're involved in Australian CS and maybe even global CS. I think you're obviously most well known for your time in Renegades and Greyhound and whatever else in between. But I would say you are undoubtedly like one of the most successful CS players coming through from ANZ. Do you think you would agree with that?
In terms of winning, I feel like I've won a lot over the years. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't know that because there was a lot of ANZ Champs kind of tournaments in the background that I mean some teams were overseas, but we would win those, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about you, I think at one point, and maybe even still to this day, you were or are the player that has the most ANZ Champs wins. I think I told you that one time, like a few years ago, when you had like 5 or something like that, and I'm sure there's probably been more since then. But yeah, obviously, in my opinion, I think anyone that would have played on that Renegades roster at any point in time would easily be considered in at least the top 20, maybe even the top 10, depending. I guess it depends on how many sort of players you want to go through if we're talking about most successful when it comes to ANZ. But I think one good representation, obviously, of success when it comes to Counter-Strike is having a sticker in the game. And obviously, you have a sticker in the game, and there's only so many people from our region that have that. Well, I want to know what it is actually like to have that sort of almost immortalized in the game. Like, I know this is kind of getting a little bit cliche, a little bit cringy, like in terms of the terminology, but like it must be really cool to have that in, your name essentially is in the game. You see people playing with it. I assume, people drop you a gun or something sometimes and it's got hats on it. That must be cool, right? Super
cool. And you only truly understand how much you appreciate it after you are not in that circuit anymore. I'm sure the ground boys still have that feeling, but I feel like once you've stepped out of that team and you're not really playing as consistently in a top team, then you look at it and you really kind of understand, okay, that's pretty cool. But yeah, no, it's definitely awesome and one of my achievements that I'm super, super proud of. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, again, like it's the same thing with everything in life, right? You don't really understand what you've got until it's gone, in a sense. And that's obviously something that I guess we'll talk about as we go through your career. Now, where I actually want to start it, normally like I start this where I'm like, oh, how did you get into esports, blah, 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 this and that. No one's really interested in that at the end of the day. So I kind of want to skip forward to the point where you're actually playing and competing in some teams that people might know. The first one that I thought was really interesting as far as your career is concerned is Parallax, right? And so at the time when you joined Parallax, this was obviously not your first team. Like everyone's got teams prior to that, but I feel like this was kind of your first breakout team. The roster was Raz, Lonsdale, Yellow, Jokes, and yourself, if you remember rightly.
Yeah.
And the first sort of interesting tournament for me was ANZ Champs Season 1. And you went to the finals. This is where you ultimately ended up going on to lose to Athletico in the grand final.
Yeah.
But you beat them earlier on in the tournament and finished top 2 ultimately. I feel like that's a fairly respectable achievement. And people probably don't, look back that far when it comes to the history of Counter-Strike. A lot of people sort of look at ANZ Champs and say, oh, it's really important, really cool to sort of be in ANZ Champs for the first time. But what's sort of interesting about your career is like not only were you in the first season of ANZ Champs, but you also top 2'd the first season of ANZ Champs. So was it kind of a big deal back then to be playing in ANZ Champs, or do you think it hadn't really built up the same kind of prestige maybe?
I think it was a big deal back then compared to nowadays because it was all on LAN. And back then you have the kind of notion that everyone's playing nationals and winning a nationals is, one of those big things.
Win a Nats, that was the big thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't just a Nats where you show up and maybe bring your PC or you show up and you go to a net cafe. It was a proper studio with proper casters, proper screening and broadcast. And I think it made the next step of kind of professional environment. So it was definitely, I felt like a big deal. And especially I was super young. I think I was like 17, I think. And yeah, no, I think it was just a good stepping stone of experience and all that.
What was the mindset that you had at the time? Like, were you kind of considering CS as a career or professionally, or was it just sort of like for fun?
Well, there's a weird thing. I had my mum look through because we've moved houses and she found like a list of what you want to do when you're older.
Right.
But when I was super young.
Yeah.
And I had this list. I have a photo of it somewhere, but one of them was be a professional gamer. And I don't know. During the time of playing, I never had a thought of being professional. It was
Right.
just always I enjoyed the game, play, and try to win. Yeah, definitely didn't think of it at the time, but the grand scheme of picture, yes, but not really in the moment, no.
Okay, well, what was interesting about that event as well was that, like, you know, you lost to Athletico. I think at the time, you know, there was, at least in my opinion, and it's kind of hard to remember back this far. This was like 7 or 8 years ago almost. I don't think that there was like a locked-in best team in ANZ at the time. Like, obviously there would have been Vox, or if they were, I think they were Renegades at that point in time, but they were playing overseas for the vast majority. I think Immunity had kind of just died or were in the process of dying, weren't really too sure where they were at that point in time. So it was kind of like the door was sort of open to any team. And Athletico won first season of Champs, but very quickly you guys went into CGPL Season 8 finals, and that was where you guys won. So there was almost this back and forth between Parallax and Athletico very early on in the stages of CS. What I wanted to ask you about this final was, you know, revenge against Athletico must have been nice, I suppose. But if you remember, Raz dropped 1.79 in that... I think for the entire event, and then there was like some crazy maps in the final as well, where he was like almost 2.0 rating or something like that. And that's something that like we bring up a lot of the time, like we as the casters bring up all the time, you know, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about when I'm casting Raz, because I think it was just such a like crazy period watching him play at that time. But do you think we oversell it a bit? Like, was it really that good, or is it maybe something that we've kind of got the rose tinted glasses with?
I think the performance, like, I don't think you can shy away from a big performance like that in a finals. Like, I think it's definitely something that's, you know, extraordinary. Definitely out of not the ordinary. But, you know, what's funny about that situation is that a lot of people that were playing the game, especially Jay or Liaz, afterwards over years that we, you know, sometimes talk about it, was Raz. I think we lost the first map, maybe. He still
it was a
did
3-mapper.
well. And he went to the toilet, or I think before the series he went to the toilet and then came back. Maybe midway of the first map or something. And then people had this theory that maybe, you know, he said he vomited, and, you know, got everything out. And then, but, you know, people had this theory that, you know, he had some, I don't know, some magic in the toilet. And then all of a sudden he drops, you know, so many kills. But I don't think it's a huge what was the word? Exaggeration talking about it, because it was definitely a finals, and you know, it was a crazy performance from him, and I think he had an HLTV highlight from it as well. And back then, HLTV highlights were very, very rare, and to have one of those, you know, obviously super cool too. So. Yeah, I think...
I mean, they don't do those anymore, do they? I feel like they haven't done them in a long time.
Pretty rare. Like, Manesi got a recent one in Banana. I don't know if you've seen that. He got, like, 4D headshots.
Yes, I did see. I mean, I saw the clip. I didn't actually see the highlight clip, if that makes sense. Like, I know what you're talking about.
Maybe he didn't get one.
Yeah.
I don't know. That
I don't know if they do
one.
them anymore, but I do remember them being, like, really cool. And I remember, from the casting perspective, I was always like, if a player that I was casting at the time got a highlight clip, I was like...
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Here's my voice. And then sometimes, like, they wouldn't include the casting, and I was like, fuck, I must have casted that like shit for them to not put it in, you know? Because like if it's good casting, like they're obviously going to put it in.
Yeah.
So it was like a little bit of a learning experience for me too. It's like, okay, maybe I didn't like hit the moment there if they didn't put it in. But actually on the topic of this rivalry with Athletico, do you actually feel like there was a rivalry with Athletico? Like it wasn't a super long period actually that I remember this, but you know, would you say you had a bit of a back and forth with them or?
A little bit. I'd say a tiny bit, but it was a bit weird because there was a time where Infrequent got banned. I don't know if that was before those finals.
I want to say that was before.
Okay. Because we kind of had a back and forth online as well. I wouldn't say it was fully cemented like Renegades order in 2020. That was like just not back and forth, but that was consistently playing against each other. Because it got to a time where it was only lasted maybe 2 or 3 events, and then the team kind of split up and eventually made Kings.
Yeah.
But there was a little tiniest bit, I think. Tiniest bit.
I just think it's interesting because like that was almost to me, it's not the start of CSGO in ANZ by any stretch of the imagination, but like I think post Crown, like that Crown 55k event and then ANZ Champs onwards is like almost like I think where it kind of really started to kick off. So that's to me like almost the first like era of ANZ Counter-Strike, but after Vox and Immunity. Like there's the Vox Immunity era, then there's like Parallax, and Athletico, and then Athletico goes on to sort of probably be the top dog for a little while, and then, as you said, there was Kings and stuff like that as well, which we'll get into. But first, before we do that, I was looking at your history, and I saw this WESG 2016 Asia Pacific Final. So I wanted to know, was this actually, I don't even remember this at all, was this like an international trip? Did you go overseas?
It was an international trip.
So that would have been, I assume, your first international trip for
No,
CS?
my first international trip was with Immunity for WESG. Oh, no. Yeah, that was 2016. Yeah, that was with Immunity. Yeah, that was my first international
correct.
trip.
So you played with, it was a really weird looking team as well, like James, Byrne, Bernor, Yellow, and Hatz.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is even going on with this roster? I don't even remember this event.
Yeah, so it was a weird one because I think I got asked by James to play, and obviously I was not going to say no because it's going overseas. I think it was in Korea. And yeah, I don't know how it got teed up with Immunity kind of having a different roster at the time, but then I got asked. So yeah, a weird one, but also cool opportunity at the time. It was crazy.
What did you think going overseas for Counter-Strike? Like, you know, as you said, this was like kind of a dream at one point.
It was very nerve-wracking because I just remember versing the other teams and you kind of don't know what to expect. You know, how good other teams are from Asia.
Was it like you were obviously Team Immunity, but were you technically Team Australia?
Technically, I think we're Team Australia.
So it's like a national competition.
Yeah. I think the reason at the time why they asked us was because they had maybe Ofnu that from New Zealand.
Right. Zusi, I'd say probably.
Yeah, Zusi. They had some New Zealand players. So, but yeah, I think we were Team Australia and very, very. Yeah, it was just kind of interesting to see what kind of caliber of players were out there in Asia and kind of comparing that to your own level. I think that was the first kind of test of, you know, how good you are compared to the rest of the world. And that was a bit nerve-wracking at the time because I obviously was still like 17 or what, I don't know what age, I think 17, 16, 17. So I
mean, you would not have been super deep into your career at that point either. No. Certainly not even at the point where I'd say you were like a professional player. Like, I don't even know, you wouldn't have probably been getting paid just yet at that point either.
That point,
anyway, I mean, that sort of comes fairly quickly anyway, the payments sort of thing, but that's something that we can talk about in a second. First, I want to sort of talk about the Avant era, right? I when I do these, I go through like, okay, you played in the Parallax era, now you're in the Avant era, then we talk about Kings and Order and Renegades and blah, blah, blah. So this is the Avant era. It doesn't last for very long, but what was interesting about the Avant era, the one thing that I found interesting about this was, I'm pretty sure you guys won a season of ANZ Champs with a dead team. Because the team was like already aware that Kings was happening, like after that season ended. But the team was Hatz, Kyoto, Lonsdale, Sicko, and Wizard. And I vividly remember going like, this team's not going to do shit, right? They're a dead team. Like, we all knew going into that final, this is a dead team. And then you went on to win the season. So like, what was the situation there? Like, you already knew you were going to Kings, but somehow the team just sort of made it happen?
I think we had really good vibes. I really resonated with Wizard. And I still talk to him to this day. We're good mates. So I think we just had really good vibes. And we're also playing LAN as well. So any opportunity on LAN is going to be a good fun time. But it was interesting about that period was towards the end of Avant. But there was a time in Avant, maybe it was Trident. Maybe I'm thinking else. So I went on to playing Legacy for like 3 days, and then the team died.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, so Legacy beat Immunity at a Nats, and then basically what happened was Ofnu went to Immunity, and then there was a bit of a split, and then I got asked by Lightstep, went in with Havoc when the Legacy had Havoc at the team. And APOC, and then eventually they split after 3 days, and I went back to Trident. I was just kind of going back in my brain, in time.
That was a weird time, man. Like,
if
you remember, like the AU shuffle, like there was always the memes, like what would we used to say? It was like, classic AU CS or something like that.
Oh yeah.
And it would just be like classic AU CS, like you'll play a tournament, and then like all the top teams just shuffle.
Rush off. Yeah.
Like it happened probably for like 2 years. Happened all the time, and obviously now we're in a much more stable period. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to say there about Avant before we move on?
No, I think, that tournament was probably... I remember it being super fun because I was next to Wizard and we're just playing and have a good time and enjoying ourselves. So, I don't think there's anything else to say about that, but I think it was a good time. When CS wasn't as stressful...
It was fun.
It was a lot more fun,
Yeah.
focused, and enjoying your time, and less about, I guess, winning. You know,
I kind of miss those times because like it just sort of felt like not nothing mattered necessarily, but like you always knew that there was going to be something else around the corner. It's like, oh, if we don't qual for this, like there'll be some other qual, and like it felt like everyone had a chance at any point in time. It's not the same as it is today, where it's like, okay, well, if we don't take that second slot, like Greyhound is pretty much taking first, so we're maybe going to have to take this pretty seriously. But back then, it just sort of felt like anyone could go anywhere at any point in time. Similar to, like we were talking about with that WESG trip, it's like, where does that even pop up from? Like, that doesn't happen really these days.
No.
Although, to be fair, you did just go to IESF. So anyway, maybe it does. But let's talk about Kings, because I think this is kind of like the juicy part, or at least it starts to get to the juicy part of your career. Like, this is where things really start to kick off. And there's a lot of rumors around Kings and a lot of, conversations that I've had around Kings that I always wanted to sort of know the answer to. So first of all, to sort of set the stage, the initial Kings roster was Hatz, Liaz, Emag, Sicko, and Wizard. So first of all, I kind of want to know, like, how long was this project actually in the works? Like, when did it kind of come to be? Because you were already, like we said, playing on Avant with Wizard, with Sicko. So
it started Wizard. There was a Sydney LAN, maybe Mac LAN. I don't know.
Like a local LAN?
A local LAN in Sydney called Mac LAN that I think Karath maybe hosted. Someone, I can't remember. And Wizard was there, but he wasn't playing. But we kind of still knew each other in a sense, but he approached me as like, look, I'm thinking about making this team because he has someone that can provide us an org and provide us benefits and all this stuff. And he wants me and Sicko, right? And he's thinking of getting Emag because Emag at the time was playing in Chiefs. He had this event in Chiefs, some qualifier he played, and he like dropped over 30 kills on a cobblestone, and he was still
Emag
playing
was
really
a big
well.
deal at the time, for sure.
So he was thinking of getting Emag, and then the last player was up in the air, even though it was Liaz, but it was still up in the air because we knew Liaz at the time was in Tainted Minds.
Yep.
But he was going to be super hard to get and
Buyouts and
taken
whatever.
out of that team because at the time I think they had Ofnu and Sonic, and he's good mates with Sonic and for all that. So, but that was Wizard's vision, and he told me that at that local LAN, and I was like, look, if we're gonna start playing with these players, like really really good players, interested, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then also with the benefits that he was saying that he has with the King's owner and all that, I thought it was a no-brainer. And then one thing led to another. He eventually, I don't know how he got into that Avant team to play for the LAN.
Right.
I think someone couldn't make it maybe, and then we're like, oh, what about Wizard? Convenient, happened that way. That's how it started. I'm 90% sure.
Right.
From memory. But yeah.
I mean, that's how it started as far as you're concerned. So I guess that's the point, right? This is in retrospect with Hatz, and that's the way you see it. But I wanted to know as well, because like I remember conversations around this team being like, oh, this is going to be a super team, right? And to be fair, like at the time, everything was a super team, right? If you remember that Tainted Minds was a super team.
Yeah.
Kings was a super team. Like Greyhound was a super team. I think it was Greyhound or maybe they were still not quite there, but like Chiefs was a super team. Like everything was a super team. But like actually when you look at it on paper, like especially in hindsight, having seen where a lot of these players have ended up in their careers, like that kind of was a super team. Was there ever any like pressure on you or any of the players or the team to like kind of perform, right? Because there was a lot of hype around this team, I remember. But I feel like also, as a bit of a tangent, that was almost, I don't know what the word is in English, right? In German, it's called Selberschuld. And that means like your own fault. There's no like, like it was something that was, I remember looking, and I even looked back at some of Wizard's tweets, and he was like, yeah, this team's meant to be the best. Like, we're going to be the best. So I almost feel like it was like your own fault if there was this pressure. So what was that situation like?
So this was the first time we started getting paid as well. Well, for me at least. I know Wizard and Liaz were getting paid in Tainted Minds.
Yeah.
But we're getting paid. We're getting these monitors for us, free monitors and all this stuff. But the pressure was there because there was an expectation. It was never said, but there was the general vibe expectation that we need to be number one in Oz, 100%.
Yeah.
And we need to be beating all the teams, getting number one. It was just the expectation feel vibe. So there was a bit of pressure, but we all knew that we were good enough to do that. So it wasn't really, we didn't really have the pressure overtake our performance. We just knew we were better and we just played with confidence. That's just how it went. And but yeah, it was definitely never a conversation that we had. It was just a vibe that we just knew.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm looking at my notes here, and I wrote down a quote from Wizard that he put on Twitter, which was, "I built this team for one purpose, to be the best. We are going to be the kings of this scene and claim the throne." So, like, very much there was that mentality to begin with, and that's kind of what was sold to, I would say, the public. It's a bit of a weird way of saying it, but the other thing that I wanted to talk about here, and you obviously have already mentioned it, like, this was your first time being salaried, so maybe even at the time you weren't necessarily aware of it, but the conversations that I had heard and the rumors that I had heard was that Kings like massively inflated player salaries at the time. Do you know what the situation was with that? Like, have you got any knowledge in that respect?
There's no reason for me to not release how much we're getting paid.
It's up to you, man.
We're getting paid $600 a week, right?
Which is, I guess, in hindsight, not a lot.
I mean, in hindsight, it's not a lot, but at the time, it's a lot because no one was getting paid unless you were either Winter Fox at the time or Renegades.
Yep.
But to be in Oz, it was super big, and I think at the time maybe Tainted Minds were getting paid, but it was definitely less. Like this was the Liaz team beforehand when they had Wizard as well.
Yep.
Because they were salaried. But yeah, when we got salaried, it felt like what happened was everyone was kind of having this expectation on other teams where if they're competing with us, then they need to ask for a salary as well, or they need to get a salary.
Yep.
So I guess the whole scene kind of rose to that standard, or have some sort of salary. So I knew, I think Tainted Minds were getting a salary later on when they had that YAM team with ins and stuff. And I'm sure you have another question, but there was an interesting time when we removed Wizard. We were meant to get ins.
And he went to Tainted Minds instead.
Yeah, he went to Tainted Minds instead. And
I've always wanted to ask him about this, especially because, like, I'm sure he's got an interesting take on it. But
look,
we've all heard the stories.
So there was a time where we were scrimming with ins, and it was like just everything just made sense, and we were just demolishing. Everyone.
It's funny that because he's a pretty good player, right?
So, yeah. So, but it worked out team wise, like role wise as well. So,
sure.
But I think the reason why he went to Tainted was just because there was a little bit more money incentive for him. So, and we couldn't provide the extra money, or Kings couldn't provide the extra money. So he went there, fair enough. But that's that story.
Yeah, I mean that, and ultimately, obviously, you guys did sort of end up linking up in a way later on in the piece. That's something we can talk about in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of just wanted to set the context for this team as well before we move too much further. Like, I don't want to go into like every event, right? Because at this point, right, like things like ANZ Champs and stuff like that, they're not like massive results in terms of your career. But you won ANZ Champs season 3, 4, and 5 with Kings. And then like a bunch of ANZ qualifiers as well throughout 2017. Like there was a couple of these kinds of qualifiers going on all over the place. But the first one that I kind of actually want to like really dive into a little bit more is the Extremesland tournament in 2017. So Extremesland Asia, which was in October. And you guys went over, I assume this was in China, because normally it was in
Shanghai.
China.
Shanghai,
I didn't, obviously go to this one. This was a little bit before my time at Extremesland. But you topped the group against Scars, which is a Japanese team, Karum, which is a Mongolian team, and VRN, which was a team that didn't actually end up going. So you also the thing is like these results at the time, like they don't sound like much, but you also beat like Beyond Maple, which was like probably the top tier team at the time. You lost ultimately to Flash Gaming in the playoffs 1 and 2. But again, when you look at who was on that Flash roster, it was like I think it was like the core of what is now Rare Atom or X Rare Atom with like Advent, and I think it was like maybe Zoking, Orman.
And Attacker was in there.
Attacker and Summer, I think, might have been. Like, this was a time where like Tyloo and Vici sort of merged for a little bit. But I remember this being like quite a good result for an AU team because, I mean, at the time, we'd obviously had Vox and Immunity going overseas, and they were like, when they played against Asia, they would always beat Asia, but then there was a bit of a period of drop-off. We remember where Mongols beat Renegades at Taipei, and then it sort of seemed like, okay, actually Asia's almost taking over ANZ, but now you've kind of gone to this event, and like there's obviously debates as to whether Kings was the best team at the time in ANZ. I think there was definitely a bit of a discussion around the top 4 there, but like it was still a fairly solid result, right? You make it out of groups, you make it fairly deep in playoffs, you ultimately lose to what ends up being a very, very strong Chinese team. So what was this actually kind of like from your perspective? What was this experience like? Was it a good result as far as you guys were concerned?
Well, it's interesting perspective on that because at the time we thought that we should have been beaten
Number
Flash. 1. Yeah, we should have won the whole event. That was our kind of expectation. Maybe there was a bit too much of an expectation there. But yeah, we definitely were disappointed because we felt like we didn't play that well against them. We were a bit timid on LAN, semis of that event.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, interesting you say outside perspective, decent result. And when you do think about it, it is pretty solid as, a first event as a team being overseas versus different competition that we haven't really been experienced to.
Yep.
Pretty solid. But yeah, at the time, I do remember that we were not that happy.
Too happy, yeah.
Yeah.
But playing against Asian teams, I mean, that must have been a bit of a jump, right? Compared to playing against ANZ teams.
For sure. They were really sharp. Yeah, that's what I remember. They were just super sharp and you couldn't really get away with silly errors,
Yeah, so the other sort of tangent that I want to go on here is talking about the Asia Minor. And I think this is where things maybe start to become a little bit problematic for Kings. But the first question I had for that was because I looked at the dates and Extremesland was like a week or something like before the Asia Minor. So did you go straight from there to the Asia Minor or did you come back home? Or?
Oh, man. I can't remember. Because China and the minor was in Korea.
Yep.
I think we definitely would have went home because I don't remember taking a flight from China to Korea. So I think we definitely went home, but it was maybe for like a week or nothing.
Yeah, like
nothing.
a couple of days or something like that. Yeah. I've got in my notes here, as far as like a question or a context, is that confidence must have been high. But am I right in saying that?
After the Extremesland?
Yeah. Because like obviously based on what you've said, like maybe I'm seeing the results differently to the way the team felt.
I think confidence was high. I think this is when we started at the minor. It started slowly falling off because we kind of got vibes. This is eventually why Travis eventually got removed. It's just after we became number one in Oz, we felt we had a feeling from Wizard that the motivation wasn't as there, just with certain actions that he was doing, and we eventually, it was that event that it was kind of
like that kind of
had that
the deal.
feeling, had that feeling, but I think the confidence was still high after Extremesland, but I think it definitely fell after we lost MVP game. Obviously, you probably want to get into that, but we had a game that we already beat MVP, and then we lost to him again.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I'm pretty sure Flash came third at that event, and because Tai Lu couldn't go to the major, I think Flash ended up going.
Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Was this 2017? I can't remember. Like it's a long time ago, man.
Yeah, super long.
A lot of majors since then.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess just for people that are watching, like the context of these results was that you obviously played MVP, like you said, you beat them. That was a best of one.
Yeah.
You played a best of one against Renegades, which you lost. Fair enough. 16-2 though, you kind of got smashed.
Yeah, no, that's... Yeah,
and then you played MVP in like what was ultimately like the group deciding game. And you lost 2-1 there, so you ultimately got knocked out. So yeah, I had the question, like obviously what was the impact on the team here? Because like, I think you look at this and you say, okay, well the result at Extremesland was debatably pretty okay.
Yeah.
But the result at the Asia Minor for a team that kind of considers themselves the top in Oz, not really acceptable to get knocked out in group.
Didn't like it either because we beat MVP. We knew, and I'm pretty sure it was like a 16-9 on Inferno or something.
Which was also their best map at the time, if I remember rightly. They were always good on Inferno.
We knew we could beat them, and then we ended up losing to them. And yeah, no, it was definitely a tournament where it was kind of just...
Disappointment.
Big disappointment. Big disappointment.
Yeah.
Especially for the minor. It was at all of our... I don't think it was everyone's first minor, but definitely my first minor. And yeah, it kind of sucked.
I mean, EMAG would have definitely been to minors before.
Yeah.
Maybe Leah has. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'm not...
If Tainted Minds would have gone to one prior to that or not.
No, I don't think so. I think it was everyone's first minor except for EMAG. But yeah, super disappointing in that result. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you look back and hindsight, you say, okay, I lost to Renegades, fine, whatever. And I lost to MVP PK. Like, to be honest, they ended up being an all right team. Like, they did go through a lot of changes, but like they were the top team in Korea, and they were actually, at points, I could make the argument that they were the top team in Asia, including like Tyloo and Vici and whatever, for brief amounts of time, maybe for months here and there. But anyway, obviously the result quite disappointing for you guys. And yeah, this is where we get into the point where obviously Wizard departs the team. And you've already sort of alluded to the fact that he was removed. But obviously at the time, the way that it was sort of spun was that he just decided he wanted to sort of quit. Because I read a tweet and he said, lately I haven't been enjoying CS at all. And I feel like I've when I do enjoy playing, that's when I play better as an individual. Sorry to all. That was after the Asia minor.
Yeah.
Sort of a tough period, I guess, for his individual motivation. And it's like, this sort of ties into the order discussion as well, because like the order signing happens almost at the same time that Wizards like starting to depart the team. Like, I don't know that there was many games really left with Kings where he was replaced already. So, I mean, let's talk about Wizard first, and then we'll get into the order situation. Obviously, Wizard departs the team, and Alistair gets added. So, I mean, can you tell me a little bit why maybe Alistair was the choice? Because I think we've already kind of gone over why Wizard was removed from the team or why he departed from the team.
Yeah. I remember we had a conversation back then, and it was, I think we had our eyes set on either Malta or Alistair at the time. And man, it was so long ago. I can't remember the conversation why, or...
It was interesting, right? Because you already had Sicko and he would have been AWPing at the time.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing that happened in Renegades where like at the time Sicko's AWPing, Alistair comes in. I'm pretty sure Sicko stayed as the AWPer for Order.
For Order for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I remember that. And then Ali was playing like B-Apps or Mirage.
He was rifling.
He was rifling, playing like support roles that are like super hard to play in like small side anchor spots. And it's just not Ali.
Not his style.
So, it's just interesting, like thinking about our, I mean, like you can say hindsight now, like maybe role wise, probably like, it doesn't make sense. But at the time, I think it was one of those things that what we usually do when we make these decisions is that we try to get the best individual player and make this team as strong as possible in general and work out the roles like just later. Just make sure the team's strong. And Ali at the time was I think like really, really good, and I can't remember the exact reason why like so long ago, but I think that's the general consensus of when we were getting players. We just want to make the team super strong.
It makes sense, right? You take away potential opponents' best players or top players and make your team stronger, even if things don't necessarily work out. Like it's the methodology that we've always seen really in ANZ. It's like we want to take the best player from the second best team so that not only does that improve us, it makes our opponents a little bit weaker. And so, it works out. Obviously, Wizard, he said he sort of stepped away, and after that point, let's talk about Order, right? This is where the Order sort of signing comes in as well. So the team is now Hatz, Emag, Liaz, Sicko, Alistair. And actually, this is kind of the point where like that joke about Order being Greyhound before Greyhound kind of comes from. Like this was the team where it was like, at a certain point, that actually ended up being like, again, the top team in ANZ, even though at the time they were technically not the top ANZ team because that was still Renegades at that point in time. So it's very much like, you look at that Order roster and you say like, that was the next generation of ANZ CS coming through into that roster. So tell me about getting signed by Order, first of all. Like, where did that come from? Did Kings sort of run out of money? Because I remember Kings just like died straight after.
So I remember, so Kings ran out of money and they couldn't really support us. And I can't remember how we found Order, but what happened was we were playing WESG 2018, and it was that end of the year of 2017 after that minor. The beginning of 2018 was the WESG APAC tourney. And we just switched orgs at that time. Can't remember how we got Order. I can't remember who got the contact. It might have been Emag. I'm not entirely sure. Can't remember. But yeah, Kings did run out of money. And the funny thing about that tournament at WESG was they put the Kings logo on our thing, but it wasn't meant to be Kings, it was meant to be Order. So that's how I remember in my mind that we just switched. And we did end up winning that event as well. But it was a weird event because we couldn't use Sicko. So, and we didn't know who we were picking up at that time. So I was AWPing. And then we had Liaz, Emag. Who were the two others?
I want to say maybe Burn. I remember
Malta.
And maybe Burn.
Malta and Burn. Malta and Burn. Inns played in the qualifier as well for that, but I don't know why he didn't come. I think he had some other commitments with Tainted
Probably
Minds,
some
maybe.
buyout issue or something.
Something,
like that.
I don't
We're not
know.
going to let you take him without you
Oh,
paying
I don't know
us or
about that,
something like that.
but I think he had some reasons why he couldn't go overseas.
Right.
But yeah, we had Malta burn, and then we ended up beating MVP at that event.
That's got to be
in the
painful,
final,
right?
right? Yeah, it is pretty painful.
And that actually, I remember that because like MVP was like the only, I feel like, actual team there. Because they're obviously all South Korean. So.
Yeah. That was the only proper team there, and we ended up beating them like pretty convincingly too.
Shit.
And that was on stage. That was the first time we jumped on stage at the time. Obviously, a bit of a mixed team. I was AWPing, and then we had Burn and Malta, so it was a bit weird. But ultimately, it went out pretty well. And then that was after that tournament. That was the start of Order, and then I think it goes into the IEM Katowice qual.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the next topic, actually. You feel like you're reading my notes right now, but
Yeah.
the IEM Katowice qual actually was one of my favorite series of all time, as far as ANZ is concerned, because I was casting this one with Karath, and like, to set the stage, obviously, Order, you guys came through the lower bracket, if I remember rightly, and you were down, I think 1-0.
Yeah, I think we lost to Tainted Minds earlier.
Like there was whatever the case was, there was a 1 map advantage for Tainted Minds.
Yes.
Then they won the first map. So you were 0-2
best
down.
of 5. It was a
best of 5. You make the reverse sweep. After, by the way, the first map was a 16-2 loss.
I know.
So you got absolutely crushed on map 1. We're all going into map 3 like, fuck, this can be a quick day, Kev. Like, we're gonna go home. We'll be ready to go to bed. Great day as a caster. You don't have to stick around for 5 hours.
Yeah.
You still get paid the same day rates. But we got baited in the end, and you end up going on to map 5, winning 16-14. Obviously, a reverse sweep happens. It's an awesome series, and you qualify for IEM Katowice for the first time. So, tell me about this series.
The series was crazy. I remember I always used to keep saying something that someone said after the 16-2. It was like, we were like effort boys, like, we've got nothing to lose, I remember there was someone said something really funny, but we ended up the next map 16 winning them.
Right.
And then that kind of gave us the confidence to say, we just smashed these guys. But it ended up being close along the way anyway. Crazy series, probably the most intense series I've ever been a part of, because that was the first time that IEM/ESL actually gave spots from Oz over. Right. Before that, you'd have to travel to Asia to play qualifiers against the Asian teams to actually qualify to big T1 events. But it's the first time Oceania actually got a spot,
right?
Or a qualifier spot. So it was like the biggest thing ever. And then we have this series at the end. It goes all 5 maps. We're down 2 maps, and crazy. I remember after that, I stayed up all night. I had an HSP, like
nice celebration.
Oh, it's crazy. And it was also one of those things where something so good happens that you don't really know how it feels until you're actually there, like what's actually happened.
Yep.
And that really hit when we actually traveled to there and what it's like to be, actual, playing at the Tier 1 events.
As a bit of an aside, I want to ask you about best of 5 series, because, obviously the major grand finals are best of 3. Right. So I'm always kind of like, when I think about a best of 5, I'm thinking, if the major grand final is not a best of 5, why am I casting a best of 5 for like ANZ CS? Like, I get it when it comes to a map advantage kind of a situation, but what are your thoughts on a best of 5? Just as far as like qualifiers or like ANZ finals, for example, that kind of thing. Are you a fan?
I think in general, this is the thing. I think that it does get to a point where it's just too much CS for a series. But I also think that, in my opinion, because it is a best of 5, and you can only ban one, each team only bans 1 map, and you play the rest, right? So you are truly testing your map pool, which means that with that best of 5, you can actually completely understand who's the better team, because you're testing out the whole map pool bar the 2 insta bans. So you can kind of get a good very, very good understanding who's the better team with the best of 5. So I can understand that aspect, and I feel like that's the reason why people do BO5s. But yeah, I also see, maybe it's a bit too much. In best of 3 makes a bit more sense. But I do feel I don't mind it. Okay. I don't mind it as long as it's important. If you're doing a best of 5 for ANZ Champs finals that doesn't go anywhere, just prize money. Yeah, okay, maybe not. But if it's proper either to go overseas or, you know, major grand final, it's best of 3. Like, I'm not really one for the other, but I can understand the benefits for best of 5s.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear people's thoughts because, like, it's weird, like, you know, players have a different opinion to, like, casters have a different opinion to viewers and stuff like that. And so it's always interesting to, like, hear both sides of the story. And, you know, I want to move on to the actual results at Katowice, and unfortunately, like, there wasn't really that much to note. You know, you said this was like a big sort of moment. It was really awesome for you to sort of go and play at Katowice, but I guess results-wise, right, it was a 3-16 against FaZe and then a 0-2 against NIP. And this was, like, actually your first big international event. Like, you obviously, as you said, you'd gone to the WESG stuff and you'd gone to Extremesland and this kind of thing, but, like, this was a big tier 1 international event. So, I mean, we talked about the jump, obviously, from ANZ CS to Asia CS. What's the jump from that then to playing at a tier 1 event like?
Well, it's funny because we played FaZe, guys. This was FaZe era with Guardian...
Guardian Olaf.
Guardian Olaf, they were number 1 team in the world. And obviously when you go to these events, right, you are the lowest seeded.
Yep.
Right.
This is this is the exact thing that happens to every ANZ
You're
team,
16th
right?
seed and you verse the number 1 seed as the first match, best of 1, right?
Yeah, enjoy.
And at the time was FaZe, right? And then we also played Mirage for some reason.
Right.
Okay. Mirage against a team notoriously for, you know, being super good individually. And I was playing, we started out on the CT side. I was the A anchor. This is just a fun fact. And who's the A Lurk? Niko. Right. And he drops like 30.
Best rifler in the world.
He's like 30 for 4 at the end of the game.
Yeah.
So it was one of those, you know what's interesting? We did do a boot camp, and the craziest thing is that we were having really, really good results in scrims.
I hear this a lot from teams, though.
Yes. And scrims don't really matter, but it is a somewhat decent indication of what you can do. What you can do. And I remember we were scrimming NIP a lot, which is funnily enough we ended up versing them in the second game, and we were doing really well against them. And they mentioned things to Sponge that, oh, you know your team from Australia is like, you know, really good.
Yep.
All this, you know, really, really good. And then it comes to the official.
Yeah.
And
you see the 0 and 2 basically, right? Like,
yeah, and I feel like a lot of that is all of that is mental. And just you're playing with your confidence. It's just different because, you know, scrims don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. So you're playing, you know, differently. And I think that's what happened a lot in the NIP. I mean, it could have been closer. Probably, you know, they have more experience. They're better players. You know, maybe probably would have lost. But, yeah, it's just one of those things. I
mean, outside of the results in the server, would you say this was like a pretty formative experience for you as a player?
Crazy experience. Crazy. Just versing Europeans in general, understanding the level. That's CS side. But outside of CS, you have your player lounge with... We had muffins and chips, and like you're just going crazy. There's chocolates, and you're just going crazy. Like you can get whatever you want.
It's a different world, right? I think for anyone that's involved in ANZ esports that hasn't gone to an international event, it's just a completely different world.
Crazy, and that was the player lounge in the group stage, and then there's a player lounge on the playoffs stage, completely different.
Yeah.
There's drinks, everything, and then there's an after party, you know, and you get invited to the after party, and it's just full. You get taken care of completely.
Yeah.
Different lifestyle.
Different lifestyle for sure.
And yeah, it's definitely surreal at the, you know, when we're there, super surreal, and we're like, you know, making the most of every second. And then also including the media stuff, you know, you have to take all these photos, the whole day for media as well. Like that was unheard of for us. Yep. Yeah, super surreal.
Yeah, you'd be used to going into the ESL studio in
Melbourne
and like one photo. It's like, all right,
that's it.
Go.
Yeah,
like,
no, it's
we got our headshot. That's all we need.
Completely different.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, we jump forward a bit then as well. It's a lot of IEMs at this point, right? It's just IEM after IEM. And the next one is IEM Sydney, 2018, which you guys played in. And I guess the first thing that I want to sort of touch on with this is actually what does IEM Sydney mean for an ANZ player, right? Because before we even get into any of the results or anything like that, what is it actually just like to sort of say, okay, well, yeah, I mean, we did have this experience over in Katowice, we had this over on the other side of the world, but to have it in Sydney, to have it in Australia, is it a bigger deal? Is it
way bigger deal to me at least? Like I feel like maybe other European players, they go to like Sydney, they love Sydney. all that. But you can tell the difference when, you know, Australis and they play a tournament in Denmark or you have a tournament in your own country. It's just different because you just know that everyone's there to support you. You have your family close to you. You don't have much travel time. Everything's familiar to you. It's the most comfortable environment to perform at the highest, number one. And then number two, you have everyone there backing you. It's just a different feeling. And it's definitely different for me. And I'm sure it's definitely different for players that are from ANZ.
Yeah. So you go on to play against FaZe again, 16-4 in the upper bracket, first game, best of one, whatever. Let's move on from that one. Not much to say. 2-0 against Legacy though. So this is the year where there actually ended up being an extra ANZ slot because I think it might have been Navi or one of the team. Well, obviously it was one of the teams, but I'm pretty sure it was Navi that couldn't attend due to some sort of visa issue. Yeah. And so they had to pull in whatever team they could get, which was like Legacy. And at the time, like when we're talking about the level of ANZ CS at the time, I remember this being like quite weird because Legacy was definitely not like a top team in ANZ at the time. But I feel like they beat Tainted Minds in the qualifier.
Yeah, they did.
And ultimately that didn't matter in theory because they didn't go on to actually get one of the qualification slots. But when a team dropped out, then the next qualification went to Legacy. Who placed like third in the qualifier or second in the qualifier or something like that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So they actually got this slot, which obviously would have pissed Tainted Minds off.
I remember that because Josh
would have been a massive upset.
I remember we spoke about it not like recently. INS. But when INS and I were in order later on, we definitely spoke about it. And it's like they're just spewing. I'm pretty sure INS was in.
He would have been.
Was he in order at the time?
I don't know, but I remember the Tainted Minds roster was like that quote unquote Tainted Minds super team. But they pretty much died quite quickly after that. I think you could already sort of tell they were on a bit of a downward trajectory, and then that result happens, and it's just like, okay,
100%,
you're fucked at that point.
100%.
But anyway, so you beat Legacy 2-0, which is kind of a gimme, right? Because it's like, well, they shouldn't have even really been there. You should have been versing like a far better team than that.
Yeah.
But hey, you go a little bit deeper in the lower bracket. Can't complain too much about that. Now, this is probably what you were expecting.
The
Notorious game against Cloud9. First thing we have to talk about is what about that Rush 1v4? He's even got more than like 2 kills in his entire career with the AWP at that point. If you looked on HLTV, I think it might have been like he had like 1 kill or 0 kills. It was something ridiculous like that. 0 kills with the AWP at that point in his career. And he picks up an AWP and 1v4s you. I think he actually ended up acing that round as well.
The thing about that round, I still remember it to this day. Sorry, I was stuttering because of memories.
PTSD.
Bad PTSD. No. I remember that round and the comms were chaotic. The communication was out the window. And it was one of those things where you know he has the AWP, right? And I'm sure everyone here, when you play a retake server, right, the most fun thing to do is have the AWP on the B site as a T, and you're like either new box or you're anywhere and you're taking all these long aim duels with the AWP, right? And that's what we were scared of.
Yeah.
Because he planted the bomb and we're in rotation to come in. And the comms were crazy. We didn't really know where he was.
Yeah.
And he could take duels long range at all times. And we have to take proper... We can't just run out because you just die. So we're just a bit scared, you know. And then he ends up being all the way in Banana. And then he kills the 2 Banana players. And then I was alive with EMAG. And I was like, you know what? I could tap the bomb here, right? But EMAG CT, right? And he's not peeking. So, you know, I'll stick it, right? If he kills me, EMAG will just swing and kill him, right? So I was like, you know what? Whatever. And usually in 2v1s, right, what happens too is that the first tap of the bomb is usually a tap. I mean, in that situation, we already knew it was Banana.
Yeah.
But in usual 2v1s, you tap the bomb first. Even though you're the 2, you still tap it to find out where the terrorist is.
Yeah.
Just to get information. So you, as a terrorist, you kind of know that they're not sticking it. In this situation, I was like, you know what, I'll just stick it. And EMAG's there. He'll trade even though if I die. So I die, and then EMAG doesn't trade. He gets around the corner, and that's a 1v1.
Then it's over.
Then it's all over.
Yeah.
And that was the round
that was 15-14. If you would have won,
the series.
You win 16-14, 2-1. You go through to the next game. And actually, I mean, the worst part about that, and obviously this fantasy kind of never ended up happening, but at the time, Greyhound was playing FaZe, I think, on the other side of the bracket. And if they would have won that game, which they also didn't win, it would have been Greyhound versus Order in the decider match for a team to go through to the
Oh my God.
arena. So like there was a world...
That would have been crazy.
I think I was casting... I'm pretty sure I remember casting the FaZe Greyhound game. And the whole time I was saying, like during that cast, I was like, man, if they win this and Order wins against Cloud9, and we must have known like you guys had won a map against Cloud9 or something and that it was possible. We were saying like there will guaranteed be an ANZ team in the final if both teams win this game. Which, you know, in the end, neither ANZ team won. But, like, that's the storyline that we're trying to sell. And we're, like, building it up and building it up. And, like, okay, fine. Like, Greyhound lost. Our game ended. And then we were all watching Order vs. Cloud9. And then we watched that. And it's just like, fuck, man. Like, how close we were to potentially having an ANZ team in the arena. It's the same thing that, like, every time, you know, even as a caster, you're sort of really hoping to see an ANZ team in the arena. Because, like, I might get to relive that Renegades game that I got to cast at IEM Sydney, for example. It was what I was thinking at DreamHack Melbourne. I was like watching that Greyhound versus BNE game, and I was like, if Greyhound wins against BNE, it's Greyhound versus Rare Atom. They're going to beat Rare Atom, and they're going to go like into the grand final. And I knew I was casting the grand final of DreamHack Melbourne this year, and they didn't beat BNE. And it was just like, fuck, man. Like I could, like imagine that, you know, like an ANZ team playing the grand final would have been sick.
The craziest part, like even though we're skipping ahead of time now, but playing my last game with Greyhound on stage, and even though it was against Imperial and like it wasn't like a crazy big game, it was like quarters or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Crowd and playing in front of
it's what you live for, right?
It's different, man. It's different.
Hey guys, just at the end of this video, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jean, who is my first supporter on buymeacoffee.com. If you'd also like to support me financially or any of my content, make sure to check out the link. It is in the description box below.